What would you do if a single flight changed the course of your life forever? Imani Rhodes, a calm yet unshakable black businesswoman, boarded Flight 237, expecting nothing more than a few quiet hours in the air. But within minutes, she found herself at the center of a storm, public humiliation, blatant discrimination, and a decision that would ripple through an entire airline. Why did the flight attendant target her? How could a single confrontation escalate into a national conversation? And how did Imani transform from a passenger forced off a plane to the owner of the very airline that wronged her? This is not just a story about injustice. It's about the quiet strength that turns pain into power, the allies who step forward when it matters most, and the dangerous cost of looking the other way. Stay with us as we walk through betrayal, courage, and transformation set 35,000 feet above the ground. Before we dive in, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss stories that move, challenge, and inspire you. Now, let's board Flight 237 together. The hum of the cabin air felt like a soft, endless sigh. Imani Rhodes settled into her first-class seat on Aurora Vista Airlines Flight 482 Atlanta to Denver. She placed her leather carry-on beneath the seat in front of her, tucked her navy blazer neatly across her lap, and let her shoulders sink against the headrest. This flight was supposed to be quiet time. No meetings, no phone calls, just 2 hours in the air to review her presentation before tomorrow's high-stakes conference. She'd earned this moment. Years of building her logistics tech company from a 2-person garage operation into a national player meant she could finally travel with a bit of comfort. She didn't flaunt it. Her style was understated, her jewelry minimal, but she valued the dignity of space. A shadow fell over her. When she looked up, she saw him, a tall, broad-shouldered man in a perfectly pressed uniform vest. The brass name tag read B. Whitmore. "Good afternoon, ma'am," he said, his tone syrupy, but with a stiffness around the edges. "May I see your boarding pass?" Imani blinked. Of course. She reached into the side pocket of her tote, pulled out the folded slip, and handed it over. Blake Whitmore glanced at it quickly, then back at her face, then again at the ticket as though something didn't match. He murmured. "First class sure isn't what it used to be." His voice was low, but not low enough. Imani tilted her head slightly. "Excuse me." He straightened. "Oh, nothing, ma'am. Just making conversation." He returned the boarding pass, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. She let it go, for now. Maybe he was having a bad day. Maybe she was imagining the weight in his tone. But a small knot formed in her stomach, a knot she recognized from years ago, in classrooms, in boardrooms, at country club dinners where she was the guest, but never the member. She exhaled slowly, smoothing her blazer. Across the aisle, a young woman with glossy black hair, another flight attendant, shot her a quick glance, then looked away. Something in that glance said, "I saw that." Imani reached into her bag for her tablet, swiped it on, and began scrolling through tomorrow's slides. She was halfway through reviewing the third chart when the same shadow returned. Blake again, clipboard in hand. "Ma'am, I hate to bother you again," he said, though his tone carried no real regret. "But there appears to be a system error regarding your seat assignment." Imani looked at him evenly. "My seat assignment is correct. I'm in 2A. "Yes." "But the system shows some inconsistencies," he replied, adjusting his grip on the clipboard. "It might be best if you move to a seat in economy while we sort this out." She kept her voice calm, but there was steel in it. No, I paid for this seat, and I'm not moving. His smile thinned. It's just a temporary measure. Then fix the system. My seat is fine. Blake's eyes flickered with something sharper, something unmasked for a split second. He leaned closer, dropping his voice. You people always make it difficult. The words slid in like ice water. They were deliberate, measured. Imani's jaw tightened. Her father's voice came to her from decades ago. Respect yourself enough to stand still in a storm. Across the aisle. The young attendant, the name tag read Mina Cho, hovered near the galley, her hands fidgeting. She looked like she wanted to step forward, but Blake's presence seemed to pin her in place. From 2 rows behind, a man with a small camera on a handheld gimbal. Eli Navarro. Though she didn't know his name yet shifted in his seat. He angled the lens slightly, the red recording light blinking. Imani didn't break eye contact with Blake. I'm not moving, she said again. Her tone was quiet, but it carried. Blake straightened, giving a curt nod. I'll let the captain know we have a situation. He turned and walked briskly toward the cockpit. The hum of the air returned, but it wasn't soothing now. It was loud, too loud. Imani stared at the seat back in front of her, feeling the eyes of nearby passengers on her. Some glanced quickly away when she met their gaze. Others offered faint, apologetic smiles, as if they wished they had the courage to speak. Her tablet screen dimmed in her lap. She realized her hands were perfectly still, folded over the navy fabric of her blazer. She was not going to let this slide. Not this time. She had learned, over years of subtle slights and open doors that led to locked rooms, that sometimes the quietest moments required the loudest responses later, not in anger's heat, but in strategy's cool. The cockpit door opened. Blake reappeared, with a man in crisp pilot whites at his side. Captain Owen Travers. Ma'am, Travers began, his tone professional but distant. We've been informed of a ticketing error. For the sake of keeping the flight on schedule, we'd like to request you move to a seat in the economy cabin. You'll be refunded the difference. Of course. Imani kept her gaze level. The error isn't mine. I paid for this seat. I am not moving. A faint murmur rippled through first class. Eli's camera light kept blinking. Mina Cho looked from the captain to Imani, then to Blake, then back again. Travers sighed softly, as if she'd left him no choice. But Imani could tell this wasn't about choice. It was about comfort, his, not hers. She leaned back slightly, the corner of her mouth barely lifting. Captain, she said, if you remove me from this seat, this flight will be the least of your problems. It wasn't a threat. It was a fact. And as she spoke, she saw the flicker of uncertainty in both men's eyes. Still, Blake's voice cut in. Shall I prepare her relocation? The captain hesitated. The storm had only just begun. The air inside the cabin felt tighter now, as if the very atmosphere had shifted. Imani could sense the collective unease in first class. The man 2 seats over avoided her eyes, pretending to scroll through his phone, while a woman across the aisle kept glancing toward the cockpit door, clearly hoping the matter would resolve before takeoff. Captain Owen Travers lingered for a moment longer, then gave Blake a small nod. Without another word, he retreated to the cockpit, leaving the lead flight attendant in charge of the confrontation. Blake stepped closer to Imani's seat, his posture tall and square, as though trying to occupy more space than he needed. His voice was pitched low, just for her, but the edge in it could have cut glass. I'm trying to help you avoid a bigger scene, he said. Imani met his gaze evenly. and I'm trying to enjoy the seat I paid for." There was a pause just long enough for the tension to register with those watching. Somewhere in the back of the cabin, a compartment door clicked shut. The hum of the engines outside the window grew deeper as the plane prepared for pushback. Blake leaned a little closer, his breath warm but his tone cool. "If you don't comply, we'll have to involve ground security. That's not a good look for anyone." Imani's hands rested lightly on her lap, her fingers unmoving. "Then I suppose we'll see what that looks like." It wasn't defiance shouted into the air. It was defiance distilled into something quieter, sharper, and infinitely harder to dismiss. Blake straightened again, his eyes flicking over to the galley where Mina Cho was standing stiffly, her tray of glasses trembling just enough to catch the light. Mina glanced from Blake to Imani, then back down to the glasses as if she could hide inside the silver reflections. Imani caught that glance and stored it away. Allies often looked like bystanders at first. From behind, she heard a soft electronic chime. Eli Navarro's camera was still recording, the faint red light pulsing in a steady rhythm. He angled it slightly higher, catching not just Imani and Blake, but the surrounding passengers, the space between them, the nervous eyes darting back and forth. Blake noticed too. His jaw flexed. "Sir," he called out to Eli, "filming isn't permitted without consent on this aircraft." Eli didn't flinch. "Pretty sure this falls under public interest." "Man, and I've got a feeling the internet's going to agree." His tone was casual, almost lazy, but his eyes were sharp, fixed on the scene like a hawk. A few passengers chuckled softly, a nervous sort of laughter that hinted at solidarity without risking direct involvement. Blake's face tightened. He turned back to Imani. "Ma'am, I'm giving you one last chance to cooperate before we escalate this further." Imani's heart was steady now. She had moved past the initial flash of humiliation into a colder, more deliberate space. This wasn't the first time someone had tried to push her out of a space she'd rightfully earned. She'd learned long ago that if you held your ground long enough, the other person's discomfort became their undoing. "I'm already cooperating," she said. "I'm in my assigned seat. I have done nothing wrong. If you have a problem with that, you'll have to explain it to more than just me." Blake's lips pressed into a thin line. He stepped back, as though retreating, but the look in his eyes promised this wasn't over. Imani leaned back in her seat, exhaling slowly. Her father used to tell her that dignity wasn't just in how you spoke, but in the stillness you maintained when others tried to shake you. She could hear his voice even now, somewhere deep in the marrow of her memory. "Don't let them see you rush. Let them see you stand." The intercom crackled. Captain Travers' voice floated through the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a minor delay. We should be underway shortly. Thank you for your patience." Imani almost smiled at the choice of words. Patience. That was something she had in abundance when it served her. Minutes ticked by. Blake busied himself at the galley, speaking quietly to Mina, who nodded but didn't look convinced. Imani noticed how Mina's eyes darted toward her every so often, as if checking to make sure she was still there. Eli shifted in his seat, leaning forward just enough to catch Imani's attention. "You're handling this better than most would," he murmured. "I've had practice," she replied softly, a wry smile touching her lips. The cabin lights dimmed slightly, signaling the impending safety demonstration. But instead of proceeding, Blake returned once more, now holding a small tablet device. He tapped it a few times, then turned it toward Imani. "This is the seating manifest," he said. "As you can see, Your name isn't appearing in the correct section." Imani glanced at the screen. It showed a list of seat numbers and passenger names. Her own name, bold and clear, was listed beside 2A. She raised an eyebrow. "Looks correct to me." Blake's mouth twitched. "The system is showing a duplicate reservation. An error we need to fix by relocating you." Imani's gaze didn't waver. "You know that's not the real reason you're here." He opened his mouth to respond, but stopped when Mina stepped forward, her voice small but steady. "Mr. Whitmore, I just rechecked the boarding passes. There's no duplicate for 2A. The temperature in the space between them seemed to drop a few degrees. Blake shot her a glare so sharp it could have cut paper. Mina flinched, but held her ground. Imani's respect for her grew instantly. Courage didn't always roar. Sometimes it barely whispered, but it still moved the air. Eli leaned back in his seat, smiling faintly as if watching a chess match enter its endgame. Blake cleared his throat. "I'll have to confer with the captain again," he said, retreating with brisk steps toward the cockpit. As he disappeared behind the reinforced door, Mina stepped closer to Imani's seat. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "This isn't how it's supposed to be." Imani met her eyes. "I know. Thank you." The moment was brief, but it was enough to plant a seed. The hum of the cabin returned, a low drone that made every second stretch. Imani sat motionless, feeling the curious eyes on her back, knowing that each tick of the clock tightened the vice around Blake's composure. She didn't know exactly how this would end, but she knew one thing: she was not moving. Not today, not ever again in the face of something like this. And somewhere in the back of the cabin, Eli Navarro kept filming, the red light steady and unblinking, capturing not just the moment, but the quiet revolution happening in 2A. The cockpit door swung open with a sharp metallic click that sliced through the low murmur of the cabin. Captain Owen Travers stepped out, his face composed but his jaw tight. He scanned the first-class section, his gaze lingering on Imani in 2A, then moved to Blake, who stood at attention like a soldier ready to deliver a report. "Ms. Rhodes," the captain began, voice steady but with an undertone that felt like a verdict already decided. "We've rechecked the manifest, and there is still some confusion with your seat assignment. For the sake of departure, I'm going to ask you to come with me so we can sort this out off the plane." Imani didn't move. "There is no confusion. My name is on that manifest. My boarding pass says 2A, and we both know that's not why I'm being asked to leave." A flicker of discomfort crossed Travers' features, but it was gone in a blink. "Ma'am, this isn't personal." She tilted her head. "Then what is it?" From behind, Eli Navarro's voice rang out just enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Sure looks personal from here." The faint whir of his gimbal motor underscored his words as he kept recording. The captain's eyes darted toward Eli, then back to Imani. "Ma'am, I'm not going to debate this with you in front of other passengers." "Then maybe you should be asking yourself why you're uncomfortable having that debate in public," she replied. A murmur rippled through the rows, an invisible current of passengers shifting in their seats, leaning in without meaning to. Mina Cho stood frozen near the galley, clutching a stack of safety cards so tightly the corners bent. Blake stepped forward, his tone sharp. "Captain, with your permission, I'll have security meet us at the gate." Before Travers could respond, Imani's voice cut through the air. "If you remove me, you will be doing so on camera, in front of witnesses, with zero legal justification. I'd think twice about that." The captain hesitated. It was just a heartbeat, but it was enough to show the crack. He glanced toward the economy cabin. perhaps weighing the optics of walking a paying first-class passenger one who had said almost nothing aggressive off his flight in front of 100 onlookers. Blake, however, seemed determined. "Ma'am, you're making this much harder than it needs to be." Imani leaned forward slightly, her voice low but carrying, "No. You made it harder the moment you decided my presence in the seat was negotiable." The words hung in the air. From somewhere near row 4, a man in a business suit cleared his throat. "Captain, I think she's right. We've all seen her ticket. Let's just take off already." His voice was cautious, but the fact that he spoke at all seemed to embolden others. A woman across from him nodded in agreement. Eli's camera shifted, catching the subtle signs of solidarity, a few passengers shaking their heads, others whispering to their seatmates. Blake's jaw worked, but before he could fire back, Travers raised a hand. "All right, everyone, let's keep calm. We're going to resolve this." He turned to Blake. "Give me a moment with her." Blake's eyes narrowed, but he stepped back, retreating to the galley with a stiffness that looked almost painful. The captain crouched slightly beside Imani's seat, lowering his voice. "Look, Ms. Rhodes, I don't know what happened before I came out here, but I need to get this flight in the air. If you could just agree to move." "No," she said, cutting him off gently but firmly. "I am not moving. You can take off with me in this seat, or you can remove me and answer for it. Those are your choices." Travers exhaled through his nose, straightening. "All right," he said finally. "Stay put." It wasn't exactly a concession, but it wasn't an eviction either. The captain walked back toward the cockpit. As he passed the galley, Blake leaned in to whisper something, his expression hard. Travers didn't respond, just pushed through the cockpit door and let it close behind him. Imani's gaze followed him, then shifted to Mina, who looked as though she'd been holding her breath for several minutes. The younger woman met her eyes and gave the smallest nod, an unspoken hang in there. The safety demonstration began at last. Mina's voice over the PA steadying as she recited the words she'd said 1,000 times. Blake went through the motions mechanically, his eyes avoiding Imani's. The plane finally began to taxi. Imani kept her gaze forward, her body language calm, but inside her mind was already moving ahead, building the blueprint of what came next. She'd been humiliated in public, and not for the first time, but unlike the times before, she now had the means to do something about it on a scale that mattered. She thought of the people who had been forced out of spaces quietly, with no camera, no witness, no voice to push back. She thought of her own younger self, swallowing the sting and moving on, telling herself not to make waves. Those days were gone. As the engines roared and the plane lifted from the ground, she closed her eyes for a brief moment, centering herself. She could almost hear her father again. "Stand still. Let them move around you. Then decide how you'll move next." Somewhere behind her, Eli lowered his camera at last, satisfied with what he'd captured. He leaned forward, speaking just loud enough for her to hear over the engines. "You're going to go viral. You know." Imani opened her eyes, a slow, knowing smile touching her lips. "Good." She didn't have to raise her voice. The word was a promise. 2 hours from now, when they landed in Denver, she would begin making calls. Not to lawyers, not yet. To her team, to her people. She didn't just want an apology. She wanted change, real change. The seatbelt sign dinged off. Passengers began to relax, pulling out books, headphones, and tablets. Blake passed through the aisle, offering drinks, his smile a brittle shell. He skipped over Imani without a word. handing a sparkling water to the man in 2B without even looking at her. Mina came by a few minutes later, placing a glass of ice water on Imani's tray. "Compliments of the galley," she said softly. "Thank you," Imani replied. She met Mina's eyes again, holding the moment long enough to let her know it mattered. The rest of the flight passed in relative quiet, but under that quiet was a pulse. Everyone in first class felt it, the sense that something had happened here that wouldn't stay contained to these 12 rows. As the plane descended toward Denver, the city lights spreading like a jeweled net below them, Imani thought about the chain reaction that would follow. A single incident could ignite a reckoning if the right person refused to let it fade, and she had no intention of letting this fade. When the wheels touched down, the seatbelt sign chimed again. Passengers reached for their bags, eager to disembark. Eli stood, his camera back in his hand, though now it was switched off. "Good luck," he said to Imani as they waited in the aisle. She nodded. "Thanks, but I'm not relying on luck." When she stepped off the jet bridge into the terminal, she didn't look back. She was already thinking about the boardrooms, the headlines, the meetings to come. She could feel the storm building, and she was ready to steer it. The Denver terminal was alive with the restless hum of travelers spilling out of arrival gates. The air smelled faintly of coffee and jet fuel, the clatter of rolling suitcases blending with the automated gate announcements echoing overhead. Imani walked with measured steps, not hurried but purposeful, the way she always did when her mind was already working 2 or 3 moves ahead. She found a quiet seating area near a row of tall windows overlooking the tarmac. Beyond the glass, the dark wings of the plane she had just exited glinted under the floodlights. She stared at it for a moment, thinking about the invisible threads of power running through companies like Aurora Vista Airlines, threads she knew how to pull. Her phone vibrated in her hand. Quinn Daniels' name lit up the screen. Imani answered on the first ring. "You're late," Quinn said without preamble, though there was a smile in her voice. "Delayed," Imani replied, and harassed. That single word was enough to make Quinn's tone sharpen. "Tell me everything." Imani recounted the confrontation with Blake Whitmore in clipped, precise detail, her voice steady but tinged with steel. She mentioned Mina Cho, the young attendant who had spoken up, and Eli Navarro, the passenger who had filmed the entire exchange. By the time she finished, Quinn was silent for a beat. Then she said, "Send me Eli's contact info. We'll make sure that footage sees daylight." "Already in motion," Imani said. She glanced toward a coffee kiosk and nodded to herself. "Quinn, this isn't going to be a lawsuit. It's going to be a takeover." There was no gasp, no pause. Quinn had been with her long enough to know Imani didn't make idle threats. "Tell me what you need. I need financials, board profiles, every public and private record you can find on Aurora Vista Airlines. I want to know their vulnerabilities before sunrise." Quinn was already typing. "I'll loop in Renee and Hector for legal intel. And, Imani, you know this is going to get ugly fast." "Ugly doesn't scare me," Imani said. "Ugly's where change starts." She ended the call and opened her messages. Eli had already sent her a link to the raw video, along with a short note. "Use it however you need. People should see this." Imani clicked the link. The footage was sharp and steady, the audio clear enough to catch every word, every shift in tone. Watching it from the outside made her chest tighten. Not because of the humiliation, it was too familiar for that, but because of how ordinary it all looked. Ordinary enough to happen anywhere. Ordinary enough that most people would have just stood up and moved. She didn't post it yet. Timing mattered. At the far end of the seating area, a TV mounted on the wall was tuned to a news channel. She caught fragments of the anchor's voice between passing travelers, something about a congressional hearing, then weather in the Midwest. She wondered how long it would take for her face to be on that screen. A shadow fell across her table. She looked up to see Eli standing there, his backpack slung over one shoulder, camera bag on the other. "Thought you might still be around," he said. "Wanted to make sure you got the file." "I did," she replied. "Thank you." He shrugged. "I just filmed what happened. You did the hard part." Imani studied him for a moment. "What do you want in exchange for this footage?" His eyebrows lifted. "Nothing. I mean, I'll probably post it on my own channel. But I'm not looking to sell it or anything. This kind of thing needs to be public." She believed him. Still, she knew that when the clip went viral and offers would come. Media outlets, advocacy groups, maybe even the airline itself trying to bury it. "Stay in touch," she said, "and be ready for your inbox to explode." He smiled faintly. "I've been waiting for the right kind of chaos." When he left, she ordered a coffee and sat back, letting the first sip steady her. She could feel her pulse slowing, her breathing settling into the rhythm she recognized from every negotiation she'd ever won. 2 gates down, Mina Cho emerged from the jet bridge, looking smaller without the structured uniform posture. She spotted Imani almost immediately and hesitated before approaching. "I just wanted to say," Mina began, her voice low, "I'm sorry for what happened. It was wrong, and I should have said more." "You said enough," Imani replied, "more than most would have in your position." Mina's eyes flicked toward the floor. If you do something about this, I'll back you up." Imani held her gaze. "Be careful with that offer. I might take you up on it." "I mean it," Mina said. "I can't keep pretending this stuff doesn't happen." A boarding announcement echoed through the terminal, and Mina glanced toward her next gate. She gave a small nod before walking away, her shoulders straighter than before. Imani finished her coffee and opened a fresh email draft. The subject line was simple: opportunity. The recipient list was not. By the time she was done, it included every major investor she'd ever partnered with, a few she hadn't, and 2 whose calls she'd turned down in the past just to keep them interested. The body of the email was just 3 sentences. "You'll be hearing about an incident involving Aurora Vista Airlines in the next 24 hours. I have a plan to turn it into both a profitable and moral victory. Call me before noon tomorrow if you want in." She hit send. As she stood to leave, her phone vibrated again. This time it was a notification from a social platform someone had already posted a blurry phone shot clip of her exchange with Blake, taken from a few rows back. It had 12,000 views and climbing. She smiled to herself. Timing? Yes. But sometimes the internet didn't wait for you. She stepped onto the escalator toward the rideshare pickup, the cold night air of Denver waiting beyond the glass doors. She wasn't just walking into the city, she was walking into the next phase. By the time her car reached the curb, Quinn had sent her the first file, a preliminary financial overview of Aurora Vista Airlines. Imani scanned it on the ride to her hotel, her eyes narrowing at the sight of debt ratios and stock fluctuations, weak spots, leverage points. In her hotel room, she spread the printed pages across the desk, each one another piece of the map she was drawing in her head. This wasn't about revenge anymore. Revenge was small. This was about building something bigger from the ashes of someone else's complacency. She glanced at the window, the Denver skyline glittering against the black. Somewhere out there, the board members of Aurora Vista were asleep, blissfully unaware that a storm had begun to gather, and she was going to be the one steering it straight toward them. The hotel room was still dim when Imani's eyes opened. She hadn't set an alarm, but her body had woken her before dawn, the way it always did on days that mattered. She lay there for a moment, listening to the muted hum of traffic far below, her mind already turning over the details from the night before. By the time the sun broke over Denver, she was dressed in a charcoal suit, her hair swept back, her phone in hand. Quinn's first text arrived at 6020. Mem. Sharpboard profiles, major shareholders, current market cap. Also trending hashtag is DoSeat20. Imani opened the link Quinn had attached. There it was, her face frozen mid-sentence in Eli's footage, splashed across thousands of posts. The clip had spread beyond travel blogs and social justice accounts. National outlets were picking it up, the captions ranging from first-class fiasco to corporate reckoning incoming. She poured coffee from the carafe on the desk, the bitter heat anchoring her focus. At 6:30 she started her calls. The first was to Victor Langford, CEO of Aurora Vista Airlines. He didn't answer, so she left a message with deliberate calm. Victor, this is Imani Rhodes. I believe you'll be hearing my name quite a bit today. I'd like to offer you the chance to speak before events move beyond your control. She hung up before giving him a number. If he wanted to find her, he would. The second call was to Elaine Whitaker, the board member with the longest tenure. Imani had met her once at a philanthropy gala, where Elaine had spent half the evening complaining about corporate inertia. Ms. Rhodes. Elaine answered on the second ring. Her tone was wary. I'm sure you've seen the video, Imani said. A pause. I have, and I'm sorry for what happened to you. But this isn't a board matter. It's a customer service. It's a leadership matter. Imani cut in. A culture matter. And it's going to be a shareholder matter once your stock starts bleeding. Elaine didn't respond immediately, but Imani could almost hear the mental math happening on the other end of the line. I'd like to meet, Imani continued, today, before the market closes. I'll see what I can do, Elaine said finally, one by one. Imani worked through her list, alternating between direct calls and targeted emails. Jonas Patel, who ran a private equity firm with a quiet stake in the airline. Marta Devereaux, whose reputation for ruthless turnarounds was matched only by her instinct for when to jump ship. Cole Ramirez, the newest board member, still eager to prove he could make bold moves. By mid-morning, the news cycle had accelerated. Cable networks replayed the video on loop, analysts weighing in on corporate liability and the dangers of brand damage in the age of instant virality. The airline's social media accounts were swamped with angry comments. Hashtags multiplied. Receipt 2A. Fly fare. Ground bias. At 10:15, Quinn patched in Renee Calder and Hector Juarez for a video call from Imani's hotel room. Their faces filled the laptop screen, both already deep into research mode. Aurora Vista's Q4 report shows a 20% drop in international bookings, Renee said without greeting. They're vulnerable. Stock price is steady for now, but it won't survive this kind of PR storm if you feed it. Hector leaned forward. We found some employment complaints that line up with what you experienced. Nothing explosive yet, but enough to show a pattern. Good, Imani said. We'll need that. Keep digging. Quinn, sitting at the small desk with her own laptop, interjected. Also, Elaine Whitaker just confirmed she can meet you at the Brown Palace at 2. Imani nodded. Book it. Before the call ended, Renee added, Imani, if you really want the board, you'll need allies inside. People who already think Langford's a liability. I'll have them, Imani said. By the end of today. She closed the laptop and stood by the window, looking down at the city streets where morning light bounced off the glass facades. At noon, Eli Navarro called. You've seen what's happening, right? My clip's at 3 million views. But there's something else. You've got people sending me their own stories. Stuff that happened on other flights. Forward them, Imani said. Every single one. Eli hesitated. This is bigger than one flight. That's the point, she replied. She ended the call and sat for a moment, letting the hum of her phone fill the quiet. Every vibration, every ping was another confirmation that the current was moving in her favor. At 1:45, Quinn accompanied her to the Brown Palace Hotel, the lobby a swirl of polished wood, marble, and hushed conversation. Elaine was already seated at a corner table in the restaurant, a half-empty cup of tea before her. Ms. Rhodes, she greeted, standing just enough to be polite. Elaine, Imani said, taking the seat opposite her. They spoke without preamble. Imani laid out her assessment of the airline's weaknesses, her ideas for restructuring, and her vision for a brand that could lead on equity rather than stumble into scandals. Elaine listened, occasionally jotting a note, but her eyes never left Imani's face. You're talking about more than fixing a PR crisis, Elaine said at last. I'm talking about ownership, Imani replied. Partial or full, depending on how fast the rest of your board wants to move. Elaine studied her for a long moment. Langford will fight you. Langford will lose, Imani said simply. The meeting ended without a handshake, but Imani knew she'd planted the seed. Back at the hotel, Quinn reported that Jonas Patel had called twice and Marta Devereaux had requested a private dinner. The momentum was building exactly as planned. By early evening, the stock had dipped 3% on heavy trading. Not catastrophic, but enough to make shareholders uneasy. Imani watched the ticker on her phone as she sat in the quiet of her room. Outside, the Denver skyline was shifting into night, the city lights coming alive like constellations against the dark. She thought of the flight, of Blake's narrowed eyes and the captain's hesitant words. She thought of Mina's quiet courage and Eli's unwavering lens. She thought of all the unseen passengers over the years who had walked off planes with anger in their chests and silence in their mouths. Not this time. Tomorrow. She would take the fight to the heart of the airline's leadership, and she would do it on her own terms. The next morning began earlier than Imani expected. At 5:47 a.m., her phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. She answered anyway. Ms. Rhodes, the voice said, crisp and practiced. This is Victor Langford. He didn't wait for her to respond. I think we should talk. Privately. Before this spins any further. She leaned back against the headboard, letting a deliberate pause fill the space. I left you that opportunity yesterday. You didn't take it. I had to assess the situation, he said quickly, the smooth edge of PR still coating every word. Now I'm ready to discuss how we can resolve it. Then meet me at your headquarters at noon, she said, and bring your general counsel. You're going to need them. By the time she hung up, Quinn was already awake in the adjoining room, fielding emails from 3 different investor groups. The footage had cracked the 4 million view mark overnight. Media outlets were now running side-by-side comparisons of Aurora Vista's diversity statements and the stories pouring in from other passenger stories that painted a pattern of bias hard to ignore. Denver's winter air bit through her coat as they stepped outside. The driver Quinn had arranged pulled up in a black SUV, the windows tinted. Inside, the heat and leather smell wrapped around them. Imani opened her laptop, reviewing the notes Renee and Hector had sent over in the early hours. The legal exposure for Aurora Vista was climbing by the hour. Discrimination claims, breach of contract for the forced seat change, potential class action territory if enough stories aligned. At 11:53, the SUV rolled to a stop outside Aurora Vista's glass-front headquarters in downtown Dallas. The building was all sharp lines and gleaming steel, the kind of modern corporate facade designed to project unshakable success. Inside, the reception area was a controlled hush. A young assistant in a tailored suit escorted them past a wall of framed magazine covers, Aurora Vista planes against blue skies, Victor Langford shaking hands with political figures, ribbon cuttings at new terminals. The boardroom was already full when Imani walked in. Langford stood at the far end of the long mahogany table, flanked by the airline's general counsel, a man whose expression was as unreadable as polished stone. Around the table sat Elaine Whitaker, Jonas Patel, Marta Devereaux, and Cole Ramirez. Ms. Rhodes, Langford said, forcing a polite smile. "Thank you for coming on such short notice. I imagine you didn't have much choice," she replied, taking the empty seat directly across from him. Quinn sat beside her, a silent presence with a laptop open and ready. Langford opened with the expected corporate line. What happened on Flight 382 was an unfortunate misunderstanding, exacerbated by heightened sensitivities. "We regret that you felt..." "Stop," Imani said, her voice calm but edged with steel. Do not use the word felt. This isn't about my feelings. It's about documented behavior, systemic patterns, and an airline that publicly claims one set of values while privately enabling the opposite." A flicker passed through Langford's eyes. Elaine leaned forward slightly, her pen resting on the table. Jonas tapped his fingers against his coffee cup. "Studying Imani. I've come here," Imani continued, "because you have a chance to get ahead of this. But that window is closing. By the end of the week, if nothing changes, this will no longer be a story about a passenger's bad experience. It will be about corporate negligence, and your shareholders will not forgive that." Langford folded his hands. "And what exactly are you proposing restructuring?" she said. "Starting with leadership changes in your operations and customer service divisions, and a permanent seat on the board for me, you implement immediate policy reforms, transparent reporting on discrimination complaints, and full retraining of your cabin crew, or," she let the word hang for a beat, "I rally enough shareholder support to replace you outright." A low murmur rippled around the table. Marta's eyes sharpened. Cole glanced at Elaine, who didn't look away from Imani. Langford gave a practiced chuckle. "You think you can mobilize that kind of influence in a week I already have," she said, sliding a folder across the table. Inside was a printed list of shareholders who had confirmed calls with her or Quinn in the past 24 hours, representing nearly 30% of voting power. Langford's counsel flipped through the pages, his expression tightening. "This is blackmail," Langford said finally. "This is business," Imani replied. "You can call it whatever you want. The outcome will be the same." For a moment, silence stretched in the room, broken only by the faint hum of the building's air system. Then Elaine spoke. "Victor, I think it would be wise to consider her terms." Langford turned sharply toward her. "You can't be serious." "I'm very serious," Elaine said. "Our brand is in free fall. We can either dig in and lose more, or pivot and survive," Jonas added. "And frankly, Victor, you've been dragging your feet on culture issues for years. This is the bill coming due." The tension in the room thickened. Langford's jaw clenched, but he didn't respond right away. Imani leaned back, letting the weight of the silence press on him. She knew the board was thinking not about fairness or justice, but about market cap, investor confidence, and their own reputations. That was fine. Motives didn't matter as long as the votes lined up. "Finally," Langford said. "Give me 48 hours. "You have 24, Imani countered. "And I'll want a public statement by then, acknowledging the incident and outlining the first phase of changes." He exhaled slowly, the sound more like a concession than he probably intended. "We'll discuss it internally." "I'm sure you will," she said, rising. "And I'll be discussing it with your shareholders." She didn't offer her hand. Quinn gathered their things, and together they walked out of the boardroom, past the wall of smiling photos. Imani caught her own reflection in the glass calm, composed and unshaken. In the elevator, Quinn let out a low whistle. "That was surgical. It was necessary," Imani said. "They're already split. Langford's just figuring out how much ground he's lost." Back outside, the winter sun was bright but cold. The air felt sharper now, each breath crisp in her lungs. She knew this wasn't over. If anything, it had just shifted into a higher gear. The next 24 hours would decide whether Langford bent or broke. As they got into the SUV, Quinn's phone buzzed with a message from Marta Devereaux. "Dinner tonight. Discretion guaranteed." Imani smiled faintly. "Set it up. I think she's ready to play her hand." The city blurred past the windows as they drove away, skyscrapers catching the light like shards of glass. Imani felt the familiar thrum of momentum under her skin, the sense that the pieces were moving exactly where she wanted them. But she also felt something deeper, an undercurrent of resolve that had nothing to do with board seats or stock prices. This wasn't just a corporate maneuver. This was about the quiet passengers who never got their stories told, the ones who walked off planes with the sting of humiliation still burning and nowhere to put it. If she won here, it wouldn't erase what happened on Flight 382, but it could make sure the next Imani Rhodes didn't have to fight this fight at 30,000 feet. And that, more than anything, was worth every calculated move she was about to make. By the time evening draped Dallas in its gold and violet haze, the city's glass towers shimmered like watchful sentinels. Imani had spent the hours since the boardroom meeting in a whirlwind of quiet calls, each one nudging the balance of power just a little further in her direction. But tonight was different. Tonight was about strategy whispered over dinner, about sealing an alliance with someone who understood both the ruthlessness of corporate chess and the necessity of choosing the right moment to strike. The restaurant Marta had chosen was tucked away in a part of the city where the sidewalks were wide, the traffic calm, and the windows tinted against curious eyes. Inside, the lighting was soft and low, a warm amber glow reflecting off polished brass fixtures. A piano played somewhere in the background, the melody slow and deliberate. The hostess recognized Imani's name and guided her to a private alcove near the back. Marta was already there, draped in a deep navy dress that looked effortless yet undeniably calculated. She rose as Imani approached, extending her hand, not the perfunctory corporate handshake, but one with genuine weight behind it. "Imani Rhodes," Marta said, her voice rich with a subtle accent Imani couldn't place. "I've been looking forward to this." "I have too," Imani replied, sliding into the seat opposite her. Quinn, ever the watchful presence, sat a table away under the guise of enjoying a solo meal, her laptop discreetly open. The server arrived to take drink orders. Marta didn't hesitate a glass of Barolo for herself, sparkling water for Imani. Once he left, Marta leaned forward, folding her hands together in a way that told Imani she was about to get to the point. "I'll be frank," Marta began. "I've wanted Langford out for over a year. He's complacent, reactive instead of proactive. He's good at smiling for cameras, but he has no vision, and vision is the only currency that lasts in this industry." Imani nodded, saying nothing yet. "What you've done in 48 hours, Marta continued, is more than most activist shareholders manage in 6 months. You've created urgency. You've made the board realize we can't hide behind press releases anymore. That's leverage. And leverage is what moves votes." "I don't intend to waste it," Imani said. Marta's smile was thin but approving. "Good, because I can bring you 2 more votes. Patel will follow me if I convince him there's a profit in it, and Ramirez is young enough to want to be on the winning side of history. That gives us 4 out of 7. We'd need 1 more to tip the balance." "Elaine," Imani said without hesitation. "She's halfway there already." Marta swirled her wine, eyes narrowing slightly. "She's cautious, likes to position herself where she can claim she saw the storm coming but didn't start it. I'll make sure she knows where the safest ground will be," Imani replied. Dinner arrived, a delicate halibut for Imani, lamb shank for Marta. For a few minutes, they ate in silence, each woman weighing the other's words against her own unspoken calculations. When Marta spoke again, her tone shifted, becoming more personal. "Why are you doing this, Imani? This isn't just about being humiliated on a flight. You're playing a long game, and I want to know the end game before I put my weight behind you." Imani set down her fork. "Because the culture at Aurora Vista isn't an accident. It's been allowed to grow in the shadows. Blake Whitmore wasn't just a bad apple. He was the kind of employee who thrives when leadership silently approves of his behavior. And that approval starts at the top. If the top doesn't change, nothing else will." Marta studied her, then gave a small nod. "I believe you." The conversation shifted to tactics. How to time the shareholder calls. Which media outlets to leak certain details to. How to prepare for Langford's inevitable counterattack. Every piece of the plan was another knot in a net tightening around the CEO. At one point, Marta's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, then turned the screen for Imani to see a message from Patel reading, "If she's serious, I'm in." Imani smiled. "That's 5. "Not yet," Marta cautioned. "Verbal support is easy. Formal votes are another matter. But we're close." They lingered over coffee, letting the night settle in around them. The restaurant emptied slowly, the piano's last notes fading into the soft clink of glasses being cleared away. When they finally stood to leave, Marta touched Imani's arm lightly. "One more thing. Langford will try to bait you. He'll want to make you the angry outsider forcing her way in. Don't give him that image. Stay measured. Stay like this." She gestured to Imani's calm expression. It unnerves them more than rage ever could. Outside, the air had cooled, the city's lights reflecting off wet pavement from an earlier drizzle. Marta's driver pulled up in a sleek black sedan. "Tomorrow," Marta said as the door opened, "we start closing the circle." Imani watched the car pull away before turning to Quinn, who had already called their SUV. Back at the hotel, the adrenaline of the evening hadn't faded. Imani stood by the window, looking out at the cityscape. Somewhere out there, Langford was regrouping, calling in favors, trying to shore up his position. She knew he wouldn't go quietly. Men like him never did. But she also knew the board was shifting under his feet, the ground no longer as solid as he believed. Her phone buzzed with a new message from Eli Navarro. It was a link to another video, this one from a passenger on a completely different Aurora Vista flight. describing an eerily similar incident. The comments section was a tidal wave of outrage. Quinn, reading over her shoulder, exhaled sharply. "This is going to push it over the edge." "Good," Imani said quietly. "Let the truth do some of the work for us." As midnight approached, she finally let herself sit, pulling out a notebook she'd carried for years. It was filled with scattered reflections, quotes that had anchored her through turbulent times, even the occasional sketch from long flights. She turned to a fresh page and wrote one line: "Justice is never handed over. It's taken with steady hands." Tomorrow, the circle would start to close. And when it did, she intended to be the one holding the pen that wrote the final chapter of Langford's tenure. The morning sun cut across the Dallas skyline, sharp and bright, as Imani stood in front of the mirror knotting a silk scarf at her neck. The scarf wasn't for warmth, it was her armor. She had learned long ago that people noticed the details, that poise wasn't just about tone, but about presentation. Today, every detail mattered. By the time she stepped into the suite's main room, Quinn already had the call list pulled up on her screen. A thermos of coffee steamed beside her. "We start with Patel," Quinn said without looking up. "Then Elaine. I've staggered the rest so the conversations build momentum. By noon, half the board and most of the major shareholders will have heard your plan from your lips, not Langford's." Imani poured herself a cup of coffee, letting the bitterness anchor her. "And Langford hasn't called you back, but he's working his network. I've intercepted 3 emails he's leaning on the loyalty angle, reminding people of the good years." "The good years for him," Imani said, "not for the passengers." At 8:05 sharp, Patel's face appeared on the video screen. He was in a study lined with bookshelves, the light behind him giving his figure an almost shadowed quality. "Ms. Rhodes," he said, his tone measured. "Marta tells me you're serious about this." "I am," Imani said. "And if you've been paying attention to the numbers, you know the market's reaction isn't going to wait for us to act." He didn't argue. Instead, he asked questions, pointed ones about profitability, brand recovery, operational risk. Imani answered each without flinching, outlining a transition plan that would stabilize the airline while implementing the reforms she demanded in the boardroom. Oops. When the call ended, Patel gave the smallest nod. "You have my vote." Quinn muted the screen and grinned. "That's one locked." Elaine was next. Unlike Patel, she didn't hide her reservations. "Victor has history," she said. "He's not perfect, but the markets know him. Replacing a CEO in a crisis can create its own instability." "What's unstable," Imani replied, "is losing passengers faster than you can fill the seats. What's unstable is a brand name that trends for all the wrong reasons. You've seen the videos. You've read the statements. If this was an isolated incident, I wouldn't be here. But it isn't. And you know it." Elaine's gaze drifted to something off-screen. Imani could almost hear the internal weighing of risk against reward. "I'll think about it," Elaine said. "You have 24 hours," Imani replied gently. "Then the decision will be made for you." Quinn ended the call, exhaling slowly. She's leaning. She'll tip if she thinks the majority's already decided. The next 2 hours were a blur of voices, shareholders in home offices, on private jets, in hotel lobbies. Some were brusque, some warm, all wary. But with each call, Imani felt the tide shift. The questions became less about why Langford should go and more about what came after he was gone. By 11:30, Quinn had tallied the numbers. "We're at 52%. If Elaine flips, we go to 60. That's unshakable. Imani took a long sip of coffee, the caffeine settling into her system like resolve. Then let's make sure she flips. Quinn's phone buzzed with a news alert. She read it aloud. Another former passenger has filed a formal discrimination complaint against Aurora Vista. The incident was 2 years ago, same lead flight attendant, same pattern. Whitmore, Imani said under her breath. The story was already spreading online. Eli Navarro had shared it to his millions of followers, pairing it with the video from Flight 382. The narrative was snowballing, and Langford hadn't issued a single public statement. Imani saw her opening. Draft a letter to all shareholders. She told Quinn, outline the damage, the costs, and the solution. Name me as interim chair until we find a permanent CEO. Should I send it now? Not yet. I want Elaine to see it first. They called her just before noon. This time, Elaine answered on the first ring. You've seen the latest, Imani asked. I have, Elaine said. And I've spoken with Jonas. He's convinced this will only get worse if we do nothing. And you. Elaine hesitated, then sighed. You'll have my vote? Quinn muted the line and mouthed, 60%. By the time they hung up, Imani knew the outcome was inevitable. Langford could fight, but he couldn't win. The majority was secured, the narrative already tilting away from him. Still, she wasn't celebrating yet. The most dangerous part of any plan was the moment right before victory, when complacency could unravel everything. She spent the rest of the afternoon tightening the plans, speaking to Renee about legal procedures, to Hector about regulatory filings, to Marta about timing the announcement so it hit the news cycle just right. At 3 p.m., Langford finally called. His voice was clipped, formal. I understand you've been busy. I have, Imani said. So have you. You've made your point, he said. But I don't think you understand the full implications of what you're trying to do. I understand them better than you think, she replied, which is why I know you can't stop it. Silence hummed on the line. Then Langford said, if you push me out, I'll make sure the story becomes about you, about your motives, your methods. That's your choice, Imani said evenly. But the more you talk about me, the more people will look at what I'm saying, and they'll see the truth in it. She ended the call without waiting for his response. That evening, she met Marta and Patel in a quiet conference room at a boutique hotel. The three of them sat around a small table, papers spread out, signatures ready. When this is done, Patel said, you'll have to deliver fast. The press will give you a week of grace at most. I don't need grace, Imani replied. I need results. They signed the agreement, a formal motion for Langford's removal to be presented at the emergency board meeting scheduled for the following morning. The ink was barely dry when Quinn's phone buzzed again. It's Eli, she said, scanning the message. He's at the airport. Whitmore's working a flight right now. Imani felt a flicker of something cold and sharp in her chest. Get him to record everything. If Whitmore slips again tonight, it'll be the final nail. As she left the meeting, the city air felt heavier, as though the night ahead carried its own charge. She knew tomorrow would be decisive, but tonight, somewhere in the air above the country, the man who started it all was still moving through the aisles, still operating under the same unchecked arrogance that had triggered this war. By midnight, Eli's video landed in her inbox. Whitmore had made a sarcastic comment to a Latina mother struggling to settle her child, drawing visible discomfort from nearby passengers. It wasn't as explosive as Flight 382, but it was enough a pattern, a signature. Imani closed the laptop, her decision crystallizing. Tomorrow. Langford wouldn't just lose his job. Whitmore would lose his too. And Aurora Vista Airlines would have no choice but to face the rot it had ignored for too long. The next morning began not with sunlight, but with the sterile hum of fluorescent lights inside Aurora Vista's top-floor boardroom. Dallas was still waking, but here, the air was already charged like the seconds before a thunderclap. Imani arrived flanked by Quinn and Renee. She was dressed in charcoal gray, her scarf replaced by a simple gold pendant that gleamed faintly when it caught the light. Every step toward that boardroom door felt deliberate, as though she were crossing a threshold she would never step back over. Inside, the long mahogany table stretched beneath a row of recessed lights. The city skyline glimmered beyond the wall of glass. Langford was already there, seated at the head of the table, posture rigid. His smile didn't touch his eyes. "Miss Rhodes," he said evenly, as if greeting a distant acquaintance. "You've been active." "Good morning." "Victor," Imani replied, pulling out the chair across from him. "Shall we begin one by one?" The board members filed in Marta, Patel, Elaine, Ramirez, Whitaker, and finally, Jonas. Their expressions ranged from guarded to outright unreadable. Blake Whitmore was not present. This wasn't his battlefield. Renee took a seat behind Imani, her legal pad ready. Quinn settled beside her, laptop open, tracking every motion, every word. Langford opened the meeting with practiced gravitas. "We're here under unusual circumstances. I've served this company for over a decade, guiding it through turbulence both literal and figurative. And now, a small faction is proposing a leadership change in the midst of a media storm. I want to be very clear. This move will destabilize Aurora Vista at a time when stability is our greatest asset." He looked around the table, letting the silence stretch. "We've all seen the coverage. Yes, there was an incident. Yes, it was regrettable. But it is being blown out of proportion by parties with personal motivations." His gaze flicked to Imani, just long enough to make the barb land. Imani didn't flinch. When Langford finished, she leaned forward. "This isn't about one incident. It's about a pattern of behavior, of inaction, of protecting the wrong people for the wrong reasons. The videos, the complaints, the employee testimonies, they're not isolated events. They're symptoms of a culture that starts at the top." Ramirez shifted in his seat. Marta watched Langford closely, as though measuring how far she could push before he snapped. Langford spread his hands. "Every large company faces challenges. You think replacing leadership will magically solve them? No. What it will do is spook investors, trigger a leadership vacuum, and hand our competitors an advantage they've been praying for." Patel's voice cut in, calm but firm. "And what's your plan to address the root cause of the public's outrage?" "The same as always," Langford said. "Internal review, training modules, quiet resolutions. That's exactly the problem." Imani said, "Quiet resolutions keep the public quiet for a week. Then the next incident erupts, and we're right back here. Except the damage is worse. You've had years to fix this. Victor, you didn't." Elaine glanced toward Marta, then spoke. "We can't pretend this is just a PR issue anymore. We've all seen the reports. The cost of inaction will outweigh the cost of change." Langford's jaw tightened. "And who do you propose takes my place, Ms. Rhodes here? A shareholder with no airline management experience? Someone whose first act would be to upend our leadership and our brand identity? I don't need to know how to fly a plane to know when it's going down," Imani said quietly. and I know how to pull it out of a nosedive." A murmur rippled across the table. Marta leaned forward, her voice cool. "We've reviewed her interim plan. It's solid, it's actionable, and frankly, it's more than we've seen from you in months." Langford's mask cracked for a fraction of a second. "This is a coup," he said. "No," Patel corrected him. "This is governance." The air in the room seemed to sharpen. Renee slid a document across the table toward Marta, who passed it to Elaine, then Patel. It was the formal motion for removal. Langford's voice dropped. "You think this will end with me? You'll set a precedent that this board can be bullied by public opinion and one viral video. You'll regret it." "No," Imani said, her voice steady. "We'll regret it if we do nothing." Marta cleared her throat. "Let's vote, one by one." The hands went up. Marta, Patel, Elaine, Ramirez, Jonas. Quinn marked each vote silently on her screen. Langford looked to the remaining members, his expression an unspoken command. But no one else moved. The count was clear. 6 in favor, 1 opposed. Langford leaned back, the color draining slightly from his face. So be it. He stood, adjusting his suit jacket as if trying to reassemble the dignity that had just been stripped from him. "You'll find that running an airline is far harder than tearing one apart." "I don't intend to tear it apart," Imani replied. "I intend to rebuild it." He left without another word. The door closed with a final, heavy click. For a moment, the room was silent. Then Marta spoke. "Congratulations, Chairwoman Rhodes." Imani inclined her head, not smiling. "We have work to do. First order of business. Blake Whitmore's suspension. Effective immediately. Pending investigation." No one objected. Quinn's phone buzzed with a notification. She glanced at it, then showed Imani a news alert about Langford's removal, already hitting the wires. Public reaction was exploding shock, applause, speculation. "This is moving fast." Quinn said. "Good," Imani replied. "It needs to." She addressed the board again. "We're not here just to protect profits. We're here to protect people, our passengers, our employees, and the reputation of this company. That starts today." As the meeting adjourned, Imani stepped to the glass wall, looking out over the city. Dallas stretched endlessly beneath her, the morning light catching on rooftops and highway curves. The view was different now, not because the city had changed, but because she had. The boardroom had been Langford's battlefield. He had lost there. But for Imani, the fight was just beginning. She thought of the passengers who had written to her, the employees who had whispered their fears, the people whose stories had been buried under non-disclosure agreements. She would dig them up. She would give them sunlight. Quinn came to stand beside her. "We did it." Imani's gaze stayed fixed on the horizon. "No. We opened the door. Now we have to walk through it. Below them." The streets of Dallas pulsed with movement. Drivers rushing to work. Vendors setting up for the day. Strangers weaving through their own private battles. And somewhere, on a tarmac or in a terminal, a flight attendant named Blake Whitmore was about to learn that his protection had vanished. The thought didn't bring Imani satisfaction. It brought focus. Justice, she knew, wasn't about revenge. It was about change that lasted longer than the headlines. And she intended to make sure this one did. The elevator ride to the executive floor felt longer than it should have. Imani stood between Quinn and Renee, the mirrored walls reflecting her face from 3 angles. She saw the same thing in each reflection: calm eyes, steady posture, and the quiet resolve of someone who knew she was walking into the storm she had chosen. When the doors slid open, the change was instant. Conversations in the hallway faltered. Employees looked up from their desks, some curious, some wary, a few offering tentative nods of recognition. It wasn't just that she was new. It was that she represented something the building hadn't seen in a long time: accountability. Victor Langford's nameplate had already been removed from the corner office. A new one gleamed in its place. Imani Rhodes, chairwoman. The gold letters caught the light as if to remind her that this was no longer a hypothetical. This was hers. Inside. The office smelled faintly of leather and cedar. The furniture was sleek but impersonal, the kind of decor chosen to impress without revealing anything about the person sitting behind the desk. Imani set her bag down and opened the blinds. The Dallas skyline stretched out before her, crisp under the winter sun. Quinn placed a folder on the desk. "These are your first priorities, media, employee communications, and immediate operational reforms. And," she hesitated, "the disciplinary file on Blake Whitmore." Imani flipped it open. The file was thick, dozens of pages documenting passenger complaints, crew grievances, and internal reviews that ended in nothing more than warnings. Reading them, she could hear his voice in her memory, dripping with that quiet contempt. She thought of the mother Eli had filmed just days ago, the way she'd looked small in her seat while Whitmore loomed over her. "Where is he now?" Imani asked. "On standby." "He hasn't been told about the suspension yet. HR thought it should come from you." Imani nodded. "Schedule it for this afternoon. I want Mina Cho in the room as a witness." Quinn raised an eyebrow. "You trust her?" "I think she's been waiting for someone to trust her," Imani said. "Before that meeting, there were fires to put out. The press had camped outside headquarters since dawn, their lenses and microphones waiting for a soundbite." Imani agreed to one brief statement, delivered from the lobby where sunlight poured through the glass facade. "I've accepted the board's decision to appoint me as chairwoman." She told the cameras, "My immediate goal is to address the concerns of our passengers and staff. We will be implementing new training, new accountability measures, and a culture that values safety and respect for all. This begins today." Reporters shouted questions about Langford, about Whitmore, about whether she had a personal vendetta. Imani didn't flinch. She simply repeated, "This is about change, not vengeance," and walked back upstairs. By mid-morning, she convened a meeting with department heads. The room was filled with men and women in sharp suits, their eyes darting between each other as though waiting to see which way the wind would blow. She laid out her 3-month action plan, each bullet point designed to be both symbolic and practical. Immediate suspension and investigation of crew members with repeated misconduct reports. Mandatory bias and sensitivity training for all employees, from the cockpit to the ticket counter. A whistleblower hotline with guaranteed anonymity. When she finished, the room was silent. Then Marta, seated near the front, gave a small nod. "It's a start," she said. After the meeting, Imani had 15 minutes to prepare for Whitmore's arrival. She used them to center herself, breathing slow and deep. This wasn't about anger. It was about drawing a clear line in the sand. When Whitmore walked in, he looked more irritated than intimidated. His uniform was immaculate, his smile thin. Mina entered behind him, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "Ms. Rhodes," Whitmore said, lowering himself into the chair opposite her desk. "I hear you wanted to speak with me personally." "Yes," Imani said, sliding the file toward him. "I've reviewed your record. The pattern is undeniable. Passengers exaggerate," he said quickly. "They're stressed. They misinterpret tone. This isn't about one passenger. Imani cut in. It's about dozens, over years, and it's about the fact that your behavior has gone unchecked. His jaw tightened. Langford understood that the customer isn't always right. He had my back. Langford is no longer here, Imani said evenly, and effective immediately. You are suspended pending a full investigation. You are not to report to duty until notified. Whitmore leaned back, a smirk tugging at his lips. You think this will stick. You think you can run an airline without people like me who know how to control the cabin. I don't want control, Imani said. I want respect. And you've shown, time and again, that you can't give it. For a moment, he stared at her, as though searching for some sign of hesitation. Finding none, he stood. You'll regret this. I already regret that it wasn't done sooner. She replied. He left without looking back. Mina stayed behind, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. Thank you, she said quietly. Imani met her eyes. The thank you comes later, when this place becomes what it should be. The rest of the afternoon was a blur of calls and meetings. Eli Navarro visited briefly, bringing her the latest footage he'd captured not for public release, but for her own awareness. It showed passengers on a recent Ava flight talking about how they felt safer knowing the company had new leadership. As the sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of orange and rose, Imani stood at her office window again. The day had been exhausting, but it had set the tone. The changes weren't symbolic anymore. They were in motion. Quinn entered quietly. Media reactions split. Some call you a hero. Others say you're reckless. Employees are cautious but curious. That's fine, Imani said. Caution can turn into trust, and curiosity can turn into support. She thought of the passengers she'd met in her life, strangers who trusted an airline to carry them safely to their destinations. They didn't care about boardroom politics. They cared about whether the people in charge valued them as more than ticket numbers. That night, as the office emptied, Imani stayed behind. She sat at the desk, hands folded, letting the quiet settle over her. The first day was over, but the real work was just beginning. She knew there would be resistance. She knew not every battle would be won cleanly, but she also knew she was no longer fighting alone. Mina, Eli, Quinn, Marta, Patel. They were pieces of a new foundation, and she intended to build something that could weather any storm. The morning began with Quinn bursting into Imani's office, her expression tight. She placed a stack of printed articles on the desk, each headline more aggressive than the last. Local news is calling Whitmore's suspension a political stunt, Quinn said. 2 national outlets picked it up, framing it as an overreach by an untested executive, and the pilots' union just released a statement demanding an immediate meeting. Imani glanced through the pages. The coverage was exactly what she'd expected, half truth, half spin. Do they mention the actual complaints against him? She asked. Barely, Quinn said. It's all about optics. Whitmore's attorney's already painting him as a scapegoat. Renee entered moments later, holding her phone like it was bad news made tangible. The pilots' union president, Captain Harris, is on a warpath. He's calling for an emergency labor council today. He says the suspension undermines crew authority and sets a dangerous precedent. Imani closed the folder she'd been reviewing. Then we meet him. Today. The conference room they reserved for the meeting had walls of glass, giving the whole floor a clear view of the proceedings. By the time Harris arrived, flanked by 3 union representatives, the air outside the room was thick with whispers. He was a tall man in his 60s, with the posture of someone who still flew like the job depended on him. His grip was firm, his eyes sharp. "Chairwoman Rhodes," he said as they shook hands, "you're starting strong. I'll give you that. But suspending a senior flight attendant without full crew consultation, that's a first." "I didn't suspend him for being senior," Imani said evenly. "I suspended him for misconduct." Harris pulled out a chair but didn't sit immediately. "You're new to the aviation world, so I'll give you some free advice. In the air, authority is everything. You start undermining crew authority. Passengers notice, and once they notice, they stop listening in emergencies." "This isn't about undermining authority," Imani replied. "It's about redefining it. Authority should come from trust, not intimidation." Finally, Harris sat. The other union reps followed. "The union stands by its members until proven otherwise. We can't have a precedent where a viral video dictates staffing decisions," Renee interjected, her tone crisp. "The video wasn't the sole evidence. We have years of documented complaints, corroborated by other crew. This isn't trial by media, it's due process long overdue." Harris leaned back, crossing his arms. "And what about the precedent you're setting with crew morale? They're wondering if one bad day caught on a phone is enough to end a career." Imani's voice softened, though it didn't lose its edge. "Then tell them this: a bad day isn't what ends a career. A pattern of harm does. If you do your job with respect, you'll have more support from me than you've ever had from anyone." The room was silent for a moment, save for the faint hum of the building's ventilation. One of the younger union reps cleared her throat. "Chairwoman, some of us actually agree with the principle, but the rollout blindsided the crews. If you want this to work, you need buy-in, not just orders." Imani nodded slowly. "Then here's what I propose. We form a joint task force, union reps, management, and frontline crew members to develop clear behavioral standards. They'll be public, and they'll protect both crew and passengers. And we'll launch a confidential review system so legitimate complaints can be addressed before they reach the point of no return." Harris studied her, tapping his fingers lightly against the table. "That's more than Langford ever offered." "This isn't Langford's Airline anymore," Imani said. The meeting ended without a handshake, but without hostility either. Harris left with the proposal in hand, promising to discuss it with his members. It wasn't a victory, but it was a foothold. When the door closed, Quinn exhaled sharply. "That could have gone worse. It could have gone better," Imani said. "But if they're thinking, we've made progress. By midday, word of the meeting had leaked. Employees were divided, some relieved, others skeptical." Mina sent a quick text from her layover in Chicago. "You made the right call. Some of us have been waiting years for someone to listen." That small message gave Imani more fuel than the headlines ever could. The rest of the afternoon was consumed by calls with PR, legal, and operations. Eli Navarro dropped by again, bringing news that the video's comment section had shifted. Passengers who'd once been neutral were now sharing their own experiences, many of them eerily similar to hers. "People are starting to connect the dots," Eli said. "It's not just one crew member, it's a culture problem. And they're glad you're talking about it." Imani looked at him. "Then we keep talking about it, and we start changing it." That evening, she walked through the employee lounge unannounced. Conversations hushed as she entered. She didn't give a speech. She simply moved from group to group, introducing herself, asking about routes, layovers, even favorite in-flight meals. The formality dropped as the minutes passed. Laughter replaced caution. Stories began to surface, not all flattering, but all honest. By the time she left, the tone had shifted. It wasn't trust yet, but it was curiosity. And curiosity, she knew, was the first step toward something stronger. Back in her office, the city lights glimmered against the dark. She sat in silence for a moment, thinking of the next battles ahead, the press cycles, the internal resistance, the quiet but powerful network of those who had thrived under Langford's way of doing things. She wasn't naive. They wouldn't all go quietly. But then she remembered Harris's face when she'd made the proposal, the flicker of something almost like respect. She remembered Mina's text. She remembered the passengers in Eli's videos who now spoke with relief instead of resignation. The storm was still overhead, but the wind had shifted. She rose, gathering her things. Tomorrow, she would announce the task force. Tomorrow, the real negotiation with the union would begin. And tomorrow, she would take another step toward turning an airline into something worth believing in. The morning of the announcement began before sunrise. Imani arrived at Aurora Vista Airlines headquarters to find the lobby already filled with camera crews, reporters, and a small group of employees who had volunteered to stand beside her. The hum of conversation echoed off the glass walls, a nervous energy filling the air. Quinn handed her a copy of the final speech, printed on thick cream paper. "It's your words," she said. "No edits from PR. Just you." Imani read the first line and closed the folder. "Then let's make sure they hear it from me, not the paper." In the main auditorium, rows of seats were packed employees from every department, board members, union representatives, even a few frequent flyers who had been invited as symbolic guests. Mina was there in her crisp uniform, standing near the front, her eyes bright with something between pride and anticipation. Eli sat beside her, a camera balanced on his knee. Victor Langford's portrait still hung in the hallway outside, but it looked smaller now, its glossy smile less certain. Imani stepped onto the stage without looking at it. She began without theatrics. "A week ago, I boarded a flight expecting to get from one city to another. Instead, I witnessed something that reminded me why I started my own company years ago, because respect and dignity aren't optional. They're essential." Her voice carried easily, calm and deliberate. What happened on Flight 237 from Atlanta to Denver was not an isolated event. It was the symptom of a culture that forgot who it serves. Today, we're changing that. The lights in the auditorium seemed to soften as she outlined the reforms. The Joint Task Force with union representation, the zero-tolerance policy for harassment and discrimination, the commitment to transparent investigations, the new passenger care program, designed with input from actual passengers. When she spoke about the whistleblower hotline, Mina's gaze met hers. Imani didn't break eye contact. This was as much for Mina as it was for every employee who had ever swallowed their discomfort for fear of losing their job. Then she paused, letting the quiet settle before the final note. Airlines don't just carry people. We carry their trust. And we cannot afford to break it not once, not ever. If you wear the Aurora Vista badge, you are a steward of that trust. And if you're willing to uphold it, you will have my full support. The applause began in small pockets, then rolled into a wave. It wasn't unanimous, but it was strong enough to matter. Afterward, people lingered. Some shook her hand. Others offered quick words of encouragement. Harris approached, his expression measured. "Task force starts next week," he said simply. "We'll see how serious you are." "You will," Imani replied. Mina waited until the crowd thinned before stepping forward. "I didn't think this day would come," she said softly. "It's only the first one," Imani said. There will be more. Later that afternoon, she boarded a flight to Denver, not in a private jet or hidden in a VIP lounge, but on a regular commercial flight, sitting in row 14 middle seat. Passengers whispered, some recognizing her from the news. A few asked questions, curious about whether the reforms were real. She answered each one patiently. Halfway through the flight, the captain's voice came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a special passenger on board today, our new chairwoman, Ms. Imani Rhodes. She's here not in first class, but right alongside you, because she believes every seat matters. A ripple of applause moved through the cabin. Imani smiled, feeling the tension ease around her. The flight attendants moved through the aisle with quiet efficiency. There was no edge in their tone, no sharpness in their posture. Mina, who had volunteered for this route, stopped by Imani's row with a cup of tea. Thought you could use this, she said. Thank you, Imani replied. How's the crew feeling? They're curious, Mina admitted. Some are hopeful. Some are still waiting to see if it sticks. Then we'll make it stick, Imani said. As the plane began its descent, she looked out the window at the sprawling city below. It struck her that leadership wasn't about the loud victories, but about the quiet moments in between the tea offered without being asked, the passenger who felt safe enough to close their eyes and sleep, the employee who dared to speak up for the first time. When the wheels touched down, a small cheer rose from the back of the cabin. It wasn't about her. It was about the possibility of something better. At the gate, Eli was waiting with his camera, having taken an earlier flight to be there. How does it feel, he asked as they stepped into the terminal. Like takeoff, Imani said. We're still climbing. In the days that followed, the reforms began to take root. The hotline received its first calls, some anonymous, some not. The task force met for the first time, hashing out guidelines that were both firm and fair. Passenger surveys began to show subtle shifts in satisfaction. Whitmore's investigation continued quietly. There was no spectacle, no grand announcement, just the steady process of accountability. One evening, a letter arrived at Imani's desk. It was from a woman she didn't know, who had been on a flight months earlier and experienced a crew member's dismissive treatment. She had never reported it, certain nothing would change. Now, she wrote, she wished she had spoken up sooner. I believe you when you say it's different now. The letter ended. Imani kept the letter in her desk drawer, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. Weeks later, she found herself boarding another flight, this one to Washington, D.C., for a national transportation conference. As she stepped onto the jet bridge, she caught sight of Mina greeting passengers with an easy smile. Harris was on board too, in uniform, piloting the flight himself. He gave her a small nod from the cockpit door. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was respect. The cabin filled, the doors closed, and the engines roared to life. As the plane lifted from the runway, Imani felt the familiar pull of gravity give way to ascent. She knew there would always be turbulence ahead, but for the first time in a long time, she also knew she had the crew and the will to navigate it. Aurora Vista Airlines was in the air again, and this time, it wasn't just flying, it was changing. Some stories end when the plane lands. This one took off. Imani Rhodes didn't just fight for herself, she fought for every passenger who's ever felt invisible, for every employee too scared to speak up, for the belief that dignity belongs to everyone, at every altitude. But let's be clear, discrimination doesn't vanish with a single policy or a press release. It hides in silence, in excuses, in the comfort of that's just how it is. This story is a reminder that silence is not neutral. It's a choice. As we leave this flight behind, remember the faces in the cabin, the ones who stood by, the ones who spoke out, and the one woman who changed the course of an airline. Carry their lessons into your own life. Stand where it's uncomfortable. Protect what's right. If this story stirred something in you, if it made you feel anger, hope, or determination, share it. Like, comment, and subscribe so we can keep bringing you real stories that challenge the way we see the world. Because this isn't the last flight we'll take together. And the next one might just change everything.